The morning Juliet Harper stepped off the stagecoach in Verdi, Nevada in the spring of 1882, the whispers started before her boots even touched the dust. She heard them clearly enough, carried on the dry wind that swept down from the Sierra Nevada mountains. Too delicate, too refined, too fragile for this life. The words stung more than the grit that pelted her cheeks, but she kept her chin level and her expression calm as she surveyed the rough frontier town that would become her new home. Her brother Thomas waited by the general store, his face weathered and sun-darkened in ways she barely recognized after 5 years apart. He looked older than his 32 years, harder somehow, but his eyes softened when they landed on her. "Juliet," he said, pulling her into an embrace that smelled of leather and sage. "I was not sure you would really come." "You asked me to," she replied simply, pulling back to study his face. "You said you needed help with the ranch." Thomas glanced away, guilt flickering across his features. "I did not realize how difficult it would be out here. Maybe I should not have written to you. Boston is more suitable for a woman of your education and refinement." There it was again. That assumption that she could not handle hardship, that her years in a comfortable boarding house after their parents died had made her somehow incapable of real work. Juliet felt her jaw tighten, but she forced her voice to remain pleasant. "I am here now. Show me this ranch that has you so worried." The ride out to the Harper Ranch took nearly an hour, following the Truckee River through scrubland dotted with sagebrush and juniper. Thomas explained that he had purchased the property 2 years ago with money from their father's inheritance, intending to raise cattle and horses. But managing a ranch alone had proven nearly impossible, especially after he broke his leg badly the previous winter. It had healed poorly, leaving him with a pronounced limp that made certain tasks dangerous. "I hired help when I can afford it," Thomas said as they approached a weathered wooden gate. "Fletcher Kane has been working here for the past month. Good man. Knows cattle and horses better than anyone in the territory." The ranch house came into view, a simple structure of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. It needed repairs. Juliet could see that immediately. Several roof shingles hung loose. One shutter dangled from a single hinge, and the front porch sagged noticeably on one side. Beyond the house stood a barn in slightly better condition, a small bunkhouse, and several corrals containing perhaps 24 horses and 50 head of cattle. A man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his surroundings. He wore dusty work clothes, leather chaps, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face until he came closer. When he tilted his head back to look up at them, Juliet found herself meeting eyes the color of aged whiskey, sharp and assessing beneath dark brows. "This is my sister Juliet," Thomas said, climbing down from the wagon with visible effort. "Juliet, this is Fletcher Kane." Fletcher removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that needed cutting. His face was angular and sun-bronzed, with the kind of lines that came from years of squinting into bright horizons. He nodded politely. "Miss Harper, welcome to Nevada." "Thank you, Mr. Kane." Juliet accepted his hand when he offered to help her down from the wagon. His grip was firm, his palm calloused, and she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her at the contact. She released his hand quickly, disturbed by her own reaction. "Fletcher has been handling most of the heavy work," Thomas continued as they walked toward the house. "But we need help with everything else. Cooking, cleaning, mending, keeping the books. The garden has gone completely wild, and I cannot remember the last time I had a decent meal." Fletcher spoke up then, his voice a low rumble. "Your brother is being modest. He works harder than any man I have known despite the leg, but a ranch this size needs more than 2 people to run properly. "Then I will do my part," Juliet said firmly. She saw something flicker in Fletcher's expression, skepticism perhaps, but he said nothing. The first week tested Juliet in ways she had not anticipated. The work was endless and physically demanding. She woke before dawn to cook breakfast for Thomas and Fletcher, then spent hours cleaning a house that had been neglected for far too long. The dust seemed to regenerate the moment she finished sweeping. The stove required constant attention and had a temperamental nature that left her first several meals either burnt or undercooked. Her hands, unused to such labor, developed blisters that burst and bled. But worse than the physical challenges were the looks. Fletcher watched her with barely concealed doubt, as though waiting for her to break down or give up. He said little beyond what was necessary, keeping his distance and taking his meals quickly before returning to work. When she brought water out to the men working in the corrals, she overheard his conversation with Thomas. "Your sister seems like a fine woman," Fletcher said carefully, "but this life will wear her down. You can already see she is struggling." "Give her time," Thomas replied. "Juliet is stronger than she looks." "Strength comes in many forms," Fletcher acknowledged. "But ranch life requires a specific kind of endurance. I have seen plenty of well-meaning folks come out west full of determination, only to break under the reality of it." Juliet retreated before they could see her, Fletcher's words burning in her chest. She looked down at her blistered hands, at the dirt embedded under her broken nails, at the hem of her dress heavy with dust. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was too fragile for this life. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Juliet sat on the porch in the cool darkness and let herself cry. Not from despair exactly, but from frustration and exhaustion, and the overwhelming sense that she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. She had imagined herself helping Thomas, being useful, finding purpose. Instead, she felt like a burden. "Miss Harper," Juliet's head snapped up. Fletcher stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his hat in his hands. In the moonlight, his expression was difficult to read. "I am fine," she said quickly, wiping at her eyes. "Just tired." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then climbed the steps and settled himself on the porch railing, keeping a respectful distance. "I owe you an apology." That surprised her. "For what?" "For what I said earlier. About you not being suited for ranch life." He turned his hat in his hands, not looking at her. "Your brother informed me that you heard, and he was right to call me out for it. It was not my place to make such judgments." "But you believe it to be true," Juliet said. Fletcher met her eyes then. "I believe this life is hard on everyone. That does not mean you cannot learn to handle it. I should not have assumed you would fail before giving you a real chance." Something in his tone, a gentleness beneath the gruff exterior, made Juliet's throat tighten. "I am trying," she said quietly. "I know I am not doing well yet, but I am trying. I can see that." Fletcher stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Your brother is lucky to have you here. Give yourself time to adjust. None of us were born knowing how to survive out here." He left her then, walking back toward the bunkhouse with long, easy strides. Juliet watched him go, feeling something shift in her chest. It was not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The next morning, Fletcher's attitude toward her had changed subtly. He still said little, but when she brought breakfast out to the table, he thanked her genuinely. When he came in for the noon meal and found her struggling to move a heavy pot, he took it from her without comment and placed it on the stove. Small gestures, but they made the work feel less lonely. Over the following weeks, Juliet began to find her rhythm. She learned the temperamental stove's quirks, discovered which logs burned hottest and longest. Her hands toughened, the blisters hardening into calluses. She tackled the overgrown garden with determination, pulling weeds and clearing dead plants until she uncovered the remnants of what had once been a productive vegetable patch. Thomas found her old seed packets in the back of the pantry, and she planted everything that might still be viable. Fletcher noticed the garden one afternoon as he was returning from checking the fence line. He dismounted and walked over to where Juliet was carefully watering the new seedlings. "You got that in order quickly," he observed. "It needed someone to care for it," Juliet replied, shading her eyes to look up at him. "Gardens do not grow on their own, despite what some people seem to think." A smile tugged at the corner of Fletcher's mouth, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "Fair point. I am better with animals than plants. Everything I try to grow dies within a week." "Perhaps you are not giving them enough attention," Juliet suggested. "Plants need consistency. Regular watering, proper sunlight, protection from harsh weather." "Sounds like raising children," Fletcher said, then looked slightly embarrassed by the observation. Juliet laughed, surprised by the sound after so many difficult days. "I suppose it does. Though I have no experience with that either." They fell into an easier silence then, and Juliet found herself studying him. Fletcher was probably in his late 20s, she guessed, with the kind of quiet competence that came from years of hard work. He moved with economy and purpose, never wasting motion or energy. And there was a gentleness in how he handled the horses that suggested depths beneath his reserved exterior. "Where did you learn about ranching?" she asked. Fletcher leaned against the garden fence, settling in a way that suggested he was willing to talk. "Grew up on a ranch in Wyoming. My father raised cattle, taught me everything about working the land. I left when I was 18, wanted to see more of the territory. Worked on ranches from Montana down to Texas before ending up here in Nevada." "You still have family in Wyoming?" Something shadowed his expression. "My father died 6 years ago. My mother passed when I was young. I have a brother somewhere, but we lost touch years ago." "I am sorry," Juliet said softly. Fletcher shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "Life out here is hard. People do not always survive it. That is why I worry when I see someone like you, educated and refined, trying to adapt. Too many people underestimate what this life demands." "You think I am underestimating it?" There was no anger in Juliet's voice, just genuine curiosity. "I think you are trying harder than most people would," Fletcher said carefully, "but trying is not always enough. You need to be honest with yourself about whether this is truly what you want, or if you are just here out of obligation to your brother." The question struck deeper than Juliet expected. She looked down at the watering can in her hands, considering. "I came because Thomas needed help," she admitted. "But I stayed because I needed this too. In Boston, I was living a half-life. Teaching piano to children who did not want to learn, living in a boarding house with other unmarried women, watching each year pass without purpose or change. At least here the work matters. What I do affects whether this ranch survives or fails." Fletcher regarded her with new interest. "That is a fair answer. Besides," Juliet added with a small smile, "I am more stubborn than I look. I do not give up easily, even when people expect me to fail." This time Fletcher's smile reached his eyes. "I am beginning to see that." From that conversation forward, something shifted between them. Fletcher began teaching Juliet tasks beyond the housework. He showed her how to mix grain for the horses, how to check cattle for signs of illness, how to mend tack and repair fence posts. She proved surprisingly adept with the animals, approaching them with a calm patience that the high-strung horses responded to well. One morning in early summer, Thomas announced he needed to travel to Reno to meet with buyers for the fall cattle drive. The journey would take 3 days, possibly 4. He looked between Juliet and Fletcher uncertainly. I hate to leave you both here alone, but this meeting is crucial. If I can secure a good contract now, it will set us up well for next year. We will manage, Fletcher said. Your sister has proven herself capable. Juliet felt a warm flush at the praise, unexpected and genuine. Thomas still looked uncertain, but he trusted Fletcher's judgment enough to agree. After Thomas departed the next morning, the ranch felt different, quieter somehow, more intimate. Juliet and Fletcher fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side in a companionable silence that felt natural. She found herself watching him more often, noticing the way muscles moved beneath his shirt when he lifted heavy objects, the concentration on his face when he worked with a particularly stubborn horse, the gentleness in his rough hands when he examined an injured calf. On the second evening of Thomas's absence, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains. Juliet was preparing dinner when she heard frantic whinnying from the barn. She rushed outside to find Fletcher already there, trying to calm the horses who were spooked by the thunder and lightning. "What can I do?" she called over the sound of the storm. "Help me get them settled," Fletcher shouted back. "Talk to them, keep your voice calm." Juliet moved to the nearest stall where a young mare was tossing her head frantically. She began speaking in low, soothing tones, the way she had heard Fletcher do countless times. The mare's ears swiveled toward her, and gradually the horse calmed enough for Juliet to stroke her neck. They worked through the barn together, settling each animal until the panic subsided. By the time they finished, both were soaked from the rain blowing through the open barn doors. Fletcher pushed wet hair back from his forehead and looked at Juliet with something like admiration. "You did well. Many people would have been too frightened to come out in this storm." "I grew up with horses," Juliet said. "Before our parents died, we had a small stable. I spent every free moment there. You never mentioned that before. You never asked." She smiled to soften the words. Fletcher stepped closer, close enough that she could see water droplets caught in his eyelashes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body despite their wet clothes. "I am realizing there is a lot about you I do not know." Juliet's breath caught. The air between them felt charged with more than the electricity from the storm. "What would you like to know?" "Everything," Fletcher said softly. Then, as though realizing how intimate that sounded, he stepped back and cleared his throat. "We should get inside before we catch pneumonia. That dinner you were making is probably burnt by now." The moment broke, but something had changed between them. Juliet felt it as surely as she felt the rain on her skin. Over dinner, they talked more freely than they ever had before. Fletcher told her about his years traveling the territory, about drives through mountain passes where one wrong step could send an entire herd over a cliff edge, about nights under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. Juliet shared memories of her childhood with Thomas, of their mother's garden that had inspired her to revive the one here, of the music that had filled their home before everything changed. "You miss it, the music?" Fletcher asked. "Sometimes," Juliet admitted. "But there is music here too if you know how to listen for it. The wind through the sage, the sound of the river at night, even the cattle lowing in the evening. It is different but no less beautiful." Fletcher looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You have a poet's soul. And you have a philosopher's heart beneath all that cowboy practicality." He laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "No one has ever accused me of that before." That night, lying in her bed listening to the storm pass over, Juliet admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Fletcher Kane. It terrified her. He was a wanderer by nature, someone who had spent years moving from place to place. Even if he felt something for her in return, would he stay? Could he? When Thomas returned 3 days later with good news about the cattle contracts, he immediately sensed the change in atmosphere. He watched Fletcher and Juliet move around each other with new awareness, saw the way Fletcher's eyes followed his sister, noticed how Juliet's face lit up when Fletcher entered a room. That evening, after Juliet had gone to bed, Thomas confronted Fletcher in the barn. "Are your intentions toward my sister honorable?" Fletcher looked up from the saddle he was mending, not bothering to pretend ignorance. "I have not acted on any intentions. I have too much respect for her and for you. But you have feelings for her." "Yes." Fletcher set down his tools, meeting Thomas's eyes directly. "I do, but I am not certain it would be fair to pursue anything. I am a ranch hand with no property of my own, no real prospects beyond my labor. Juliet deserves better than that." "What Juliet deserves is someone who sees her strength instead of her supposed fragility," Thomas said firmly. "Someone who respects her intelligence and spirit. From what I have observed, you might be that person." Fletcher looked stunned. "You would not object." "I would object if you hurt her. But if your feelings are genuine, and if she returns them, then you have my blessing to court her properly." Thomas paused. "Just be certain, Fletcher. My sister has already lost too much in her life. Do not add yourself to that list unless you are prepared to stay." The conversation hung heavy on Fletcher's mind over the next several days. He became more withdrawn, and Juliet noticed the change immediately. She wondered if she had misread the signals between them, if what she thought was mutual attraction had been entirely one-sided. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, she confronted him one afternoon as he was working in the horse corral. "Have I done something to offend you?" Fletcher turned to her, surprise evident on his face. "No, why would you think that? You have been avoiding me, barely speaking to me. I thought perhaps we had become friends, but now I am not sure." He climbed over the corral fence, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as nervousness. "You have done nothing wrong. I have been trying to sort through some thoughts, that is all." "What kind of thoughts?" Fletcher hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Thoughts about you, about us, about whether I have any right to feel the way I do." Juliet's heart began to race. "And how do you feel?" "Like I am standing on the edge of something terrifying and wonderful at the same time." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I care about you, Juliet, more than I should, more than is probably wise, but I am just a ranch hand. I have no land, no security to offer you. You could return to Boston, find some educated man who could give you a comfortable life." "I do not want a comfortable life in Boston," Juliet said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I want a meaningful life here, and you are wrong about yourself, Fletcher. You have more to offer than you realize." "What could I possibly offer someone like you? Understanding, respect, partnership." She paused, gathering her courage. "Love, if that is what you are trying to say." Fletcher's eyes widened. "You would want that from me." "I already do," Juliet said softly. "I have for a while now. I was just waiting to see if you felt the same." The distance between them closed in a heartbeat. Fletcher cupped her face in his calloused hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "I have never felt like this before." "You scare me half to death, Juliet Harper." "Good," she whispered, "because you terrify me too." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and launching into the unknown all at once. His lips were warm and certain against hers, and Juliet felt something unlock in her chest, some part of herself she had kept carefully guarded for years. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Your brother knows," Fletcher said. "I talked to him. He gave his blessing if you are willing." "Willing to what exactly?" Juliet asked, though her smile suggested she knew. to let me court you properly, to see if what we have is real and lasting." "I already know it is real," Juliet said, "but I am happy to let you prove it to me." The summer unfolded like a flower opening to the sun. Fletcher courted Juliet with quiet determination, finding ways to show his affection despite the demanding ranch work. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow beyond the north pasture. He taught her to ride like a true ranch woman, and they took long evening rides along the river, talking until the stars emerged. He built her a new bench for the garden and repaired the porch swing so they could sit together in the cool evenings. Juliet bloomed under his attention. The woman who had arrived in Verdi looking fragile and uncertain had transformed into someone confident and capable. She could now cook a meal for a dozen ranch hands without breaking a sweat, mend a torn saddle blanket, assist with difficult horse births, and keep the ranch accounts balanced to the penny. But more than that, she had found her place. The ranch no longer felt like Thomas's dream that she was helping maintain. It felt like home. In late August, a crisis tested them all. A wildfire started in the hills to the west, driven by hot winds toward the valley where the Harper ranch lay. They had perhaps 2 days to prepare, maybe less if the wind increased. Thomas organized the defense while Fletcher and Juliet worked frantically to create fire breaks and move the most vulnerable animals to safer ground. Other ranchers from the area arrived to help, understanding that a fire this size threatened everyone. For 36 hours, no one slept. They dug trenches, soaked the ground near buildings, and kept watch as the orange glow on the horizon grew brighter. The fire reached them on the second night, a wall of flame that seemed to devour the world. Juliet worked alongside the men, her dress soaked with water, her face blackened with ash. When a spot fire started near the barn, she was the first to reach it, beating at the flames with a wet blanket until others arrived to help. Fletcher found her in the chaos, his face grim with worry. "You need to get to safety. If the wind shifts, this whole area could go up." "I am not leaving," Juliet said firmly. "This ranch is my home. I will fight for it." He looked at her then with such fierce pride and love that it took her breath away. "Then we fight together." They held the line through the night. By dawn, when the wind finally shifted and pushed the fire back on itself, they were exhausted and filthy but victorious. The ranch had survived with minimal damage. More importantly, no one had been injured. In the gray light of morning, as neighbors began heading home and Thomas fell asleep standing up against the barn wall, Fletcher took Juliet's hand and led her to the garden. Her carefully tended plants were covered in ash but alive, protected by the fire break they had dug around the entire homestead. "You saved this place," Fletcher said. "Your planning, your attention to detail, your refusal to give up. We would have lost everything without you." Juliet leaned against him, too tired to stand on her own. "We saved it, all of us together." "I was wrong about you," Fletcher said quietly. "That first day when I thought you were too fragile for ranch life, I was looking for the wrong kind of strength. I thought it had to be all physical endurance and rough handling, but you showed me that strength comes in many forms: intelligence, determination, the courage to keep going when everything tells you to quit." "You taught me about that courage," Juliet replied. "You could have given up on me, but you gave me a chance instead. You saw past what I appeared to be and waited to see who I could become." Fletcher pulled back enough to look at her face, using his thumb to wipe away a streak of ash from her cheek. "I see who you are. A woman strong enough to build a life in hard country. A woman brave enough to love a wandering cowboy with nothing to his name." He paused, then said the words he had been holding back for weeks. "Marry me, Juliet." She stared at him, her eyes filling with tears that had nothing to do with smoke. "You mean that?" I have never meant anything more in my life. I know the timing is poor, standing here covered in ash after nearly losing everything. I know I should wait, do this properly with a ring and a romantic gesture. But I cannot wait another moment. I love you. I want to build a life with you, right here on this ranch, if you will have me. Yes, Juliet said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course I will marry you. He kissed her then, and despite their exhaustion and the destruction around them, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. They married 6 weeks later, in early October when the aspens had turned gold in the mountains, and the air carried the first hint of coming winter. The ceremony took place in Verdi's small church, attended by Thomas and the neighbors who had helped fight the fire. Juliet wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, and Fletcher wore his best clothes, his hair finely trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. Reverend Morrison, who had performed marriages in Nevada territory for 20 years, pronounced them husband and wife with genuine warmth. I have seen many couples stand here, he said, but few with the kind of partnership these two have already demonstrated. May your marriage be blessed with the same strength and determination you have shown in building your life here. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. The women of Verdi had prepared food, and someone brought a fiddle. As the sun set, Fletcher led Juliet in a dance on the rough wooden floor of the church hall. She felt his heart beating against hers, steady and strong, and knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. "Happy," Fletcher murmured against her hair. "Happier than I knew was possible," Juliet replied. Thomas watched them with obvious satisfaction. His gamble in asking Juliet to come west had paid off in ways he never could have anticipated. Not only had she saved the ranch with her capable management, but she had found love with a good man. And Fletcher, for his part, had found a reason to finally stop wandering. That winter tested them as surely as the summer fire had. Snow fell early and heavy, isolating the ranch for weeks at a time. But Fletcher and Juliet faced it together, their small cabin warm with the fire Fletcher kept burning and the love that had grown between them. They spent long evenings talking about their plans for the ranch, for the future they would build together. "I have been thinking," Fletcher said one night as they sat before the fire, "about buying some of the land adjacent to your brother's property. If we pool our resources, we could expand the ranch significantly, make it something really substantial." "You want to stay permanently?" Juliet asked. "I thought you enjoyed moving from place to place." "I did before I had a reason to stay." Fletcher pulled her closer. "Now I have every reason in the world. You are my home, Juliet. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." She kissed him softly. "Then we will build that home together. We will make this ranch into something that lasts." Spring came eventually, as it always did, melting the snow and revealing the land renewed. Juliet's garden burst into life with the warm weather, and she planted twice as much as the year before. The cattle had survived the winter well, and the horses Fletcher had been training fetched good prices at the market in Reno. In May, Juliet discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Juliet had heard too many stories of women dying in childbirth, especially out here where medical care was limited. But Fletcher held her close and promised that everything would be all right. "You are the strongest person I know," he said. "If anyone can do this, it is you." The pregnancy progressed well through the summer. Juliet continued working as much as Fletcher would allow, which was not as much as she wanted. He had become protective to the point of being overbearing, until she finally sat him down and explained that she needed to stay active, that being treated like fragile china would drive her mad. "I spent too many years being told I was too delicate for real life," she reminded him. Do not start treating me that way now." Fletcher relented, though he still watched her like a hawk whenever she did anything remotely strenuous. Thomas found it amusing, teasing his friend about becoming a mother hen. In December, as snow once again blanketed the valley, Juliet went into labor. Fletcher rode through a storm to fetch the midwife from town, pushing his horse to dangerous speeds because the alternative, leaving Juliet without help, was unthinkable. He returned with Mrs. Patterson, an experienced midwife who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor was long and difficult. Fletcher paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, while Thomas tried unsuccessfully to calm him. Every cry from Juliet felt like a knife to Fletcher's heart. He had faced down stampeding cattle, broken wild horses, survived 100 dangerous situations, but nothing had ever terrified him like this. When Mrs. Patterson finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, Fletcher nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy. And your wife did beautifully. She is strong as iron, that one." Fletcher rushed into the room to find Juliet propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but radiantly happy. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket she had knitted herself, was the smallest person Fletcher had ever seen. His son. Their son. "He is perfect," Juliet whispered as Fletcher sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Do you want to hold him?" Fletcher had handled countless newborn foals and calves, but this was different. This tiny human felt impossibly fragile. He took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face, the miniature fingers curled into fists. Something cracked open in his chest, a fierce, protective love unlike anything he had ever experienced. "What should we name him?" he asked, unable to look away from his son's face. "I was thinking about your father," Juliet said softly. "What was his name?" "James." Fletcher's voice roughened with emotion. "James William Kane." "Then that is what we will call him. James Harper Kane, if that suits you." Harper as his middle name for my family and for the ranch that brought us together. "It suits perfectly." Fletcher carefully returned the baby to Juliet's arms, then leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for him, for everything, for being brave enough to come west, for giving me a family." Juliet reached up to touch his face. "Thank you for seeing past what I appeared to be, for teaching me that strength comes in many forms, for loving all of them." The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching in Nevada territory was never easy. They faced droughts and hard winters, cattle prices that fluctuated wildly, the constant threat of rustlers and predators. But Fletcher and Juliet faced each obstacle as they had faced that first wildfire together, with determination and unwavering partnership. Young James grew strong and healthy, a boy who inherited his mother's intelligence and his father's easy way with animals. By the time he was 3, he was already following Fletcher around the ranch, mimicking his father's walk and trying to help with the chores. Juliet's garden expanded each year until it provided not just for their household, but enough surplus to sell in town. She had a gift for growing things, and her vegetables were known throughout the region for their quality. Fletcher often joked that she could probably make crops grow on bare rock if she decided to try. In 1886, Fletcher and Thomas successfully purchased the adjacent property, nearly doubling the size of their operation. The Harper Kane Ranch, as it became known, developed a reputation for quality horses. Fletcher's patient training methods produced animals that were sought after throughout Nevada and beyond. Thomas never married, claiming that one wedding in the family was enough excitement. But he doted on his nephew James, teaching the boy to read and filling his head with stories. He had found contentment in the life they had built together, the 3 adults working in harmony to create something lasting. In the spring of 1888, Juliet gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. This time the birth was easier, and Fletcher was slightly less of a nervous wreck, though Juliet still caught him checking on the baby a dozen times each night. Sarah proved to have her mother's green eyes, and a temperament that suggested she would be every bit as determined as Juliet herself. One evening in late summer, with James helping Thomas in the barn and Sarah asleep in her cradle, Fletcher and Juliet sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments at day's end, a chance to simply be together without the demands of ranch life pressing in. "You ever think about that first day?" Fletcher asked, his arm around Juliet's shoulders. "When you stepped off that stagecoach and everyone was whispering about how fragile you were," Juliet laughed softly. "I think about it often. I was terrified, though I tried not to show it. Everything seemed so harsh and unforgiving. I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. And now I cannot imagine being anywhere else." She leaned into him, comfortable and content. "This land that seemed so harsh taught me what I was truly capable of. You taught me that." "I think you taught me more than I taught you," Fletcher said. "I spent years thinking strength was just about physical toughness, about being able to outwork and outlast everyone else. But you showed me different. You showed me that real strength is about adaptation, about meeting challenges with intelligence and creativity, about refusing to accept other people's limitations." "We taught each other," Juliet corrected. "That is what partnership means." Fletcher pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you, more now than the day we married, which I would not have thought possible." "Love is like that," Juliet said. "It grows if you tend it properly, like my garden." "Everything comes back to your garden," Fletcher teased, "because gardens teach us about life. You plant seeds, you water them, you protect them from harsh weather and pests and all the things that would destroy them. And if you do it right, if you are patient and consistent, you get to harvest the rewards. Our love is like that. We planted something good and tended it carefully, and look what we have grown." Fletcher looked out at the ranch spreading before them, at the sturdy house with smoke curling from its chimney, at the well-maintained barn and corrals, at the garden still lush with late summer vegetables, at the cattle dotting the hillside and the horses grazing peacefully in the pasture. Beyond the immediate homestead, the land stretched away toward mountains purple in the fading light. His land now, his and Juliet's together, a legacy they would pass to their children. "We have built something good here," he agreed. "Something that will last." Inside the house, Sarah began to fuss, and Juliet rose to tend to her. Fletcher followed her inside, and together they settled into the evening routine that had become as natural as breathing. Dinner preparation, caring for the children, discussing the next day's work, all the small intimacies of a shared life. Later, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet except for the usual night sounds of animals and wind, Fletcher and Juliet lay in bed talking quietly. It was in these private moments that they were most themselves, not rancher and ranch wife, but simply two people who had found each other against all odds. "James asked me today when he could start learning to break horses," Juliet said. "He is only 5 years old, but he is convinced he is ready." Fletcher chuckled. "He has been watching me work. I will start him on ground training, teach him how to read horse behavior. The actual riding can wait a few years." "He adores you," Juliet said softly. "Follows you everywhere, wants to do everything exactly the way you do it." "I hope I am worthy of that adoration. I want to be the kind of father mine was patient and present." "You are," Juliet assured him. "You are exactly the father our children need." They fell silent, comfortable in the darkness. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, the sound lonely and wild. Once, that sound had frightened Juliet, made her feel how far from civilization she had come. Now it was just part of the night music, as familiar as the creak of the house settling or the whisper of wind through the eaves. "You ever miss Boston?" Fletcher asked suddenly. "The culture, the society, the easier life." Juliet considered the question honestly. "I miss music sometimes. The symphony, the opera, but I have found different music here. I miss certain conveniences, hot baths and ready-made dresses and markets where you could buy anything you needed. But I do not miss the life I was living there. I was existing, not really alive. Here, every day matters. What I do makes a real difference." "You make all the difference," Fletcher said, his voice rough with emotion. "To this ranch, to your brother, to our children, to me, especially to me. I was just drifting before I met you, working one ranch after another with no real purpose. You gave me something worth staying for." Juliet turned to face him in the darkness, her hand finding his cheek. "We gave each other purpose. We found each other at exactly the moment we both needed finding." As the years continued to unfold, the Harper Kane ranch grew and prospered. They weathered the economic panics that devastated many Western ranchers, partly through Fletcher's careful management and partly through Juliet's diversification efforts. Beyond the cattle and horses, she established a thriving market garden and even began keeping bees, selling honey in town. James grew into a capable young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's quick mind. By the time he was 12, he could handle most ranch tasks competently, and he had inherited Fletcher's gift with horses. Sarah, meanwhile, showed her mother's talent for growing things, spending hours in the garden learning the secrets of coaxing life from the high desert soil. In 1892, Thomas fell ill with pneumonia. For weeks, he hovered between life and death while Juliet nursed him tirelessly. Fletcher took over Thomas's responsibilities without complaint, working from before dawn until well after dark to keep the ranch running. It was a testament to how far they had come that the operation could survive such a crisis. Thomas eventually recovered, though the illness left him weakened. He was forced to step back from the most physically demanding work, a transition he struggled with, until Juliet convinced him that his knowledge and experience were just as valuable as physical labor. "You taught me everything I know about keeping the books," she reminded him. "Now teach James and Sarah. Pass on what you have learned so they can carry it forward." Thomas found new purpose in educating the next generation, and his evening lessons became a treasured part of the household routine. He taught the children mathematics and history, reading and writing, all the things they needed to know to manage a ranch successfully in an increasingly complex world. In 1895, Nevada became a state, and Verdi grew from a rough frontier town into a proper community with a school, a church, and several thriving businesses. Fletcher and Juliet found themselves among the established families of the region, respected for their hard work and integrity. One afternoon in early autumn, as Juliet worked in her garden with Sarah, a stagecoach pulled up in front of the house. A young woman stepped down, looking around with wide eyes that held both fear and determination. She was dressed in city clothes, clearly not prepared for ranch life, and she clutched a single carpetbag as though it contained everything she owned. Juliet straightened, pushing hair back from her face with a dirt-smudged hand. She recognized something in the woman's expression, a reflection of her own face 13 years earlier. "Can I help you?" Juliet called out. The young woman approached hesitantly. "I am looking for the Harper Kane Ranch. I was told I might find work here. I can cook and clean, and I am willing to learn other tasks. I do not have much experience, but I am a hard worker." Juliet studied the woman, seeing past the city dress and uncertain manner to the determination beneath. "What is your name?" "Alice. Alice Morrison. I came from San Francisco after my father died. I have nowhere else to go." Sarah tugged on her mother's skirt. "Can she stay, Mama? She looks sad." Juliet smiled at her daughter's compassion, then looked back at Alice. "We can always use an extra pair of hands, especially during harvest season. The work is hard, I will not lie about that, but if you are serious about learning, we will teach you." Relief flooded Alice's face. "Thank you. I will not disappoint you." As Juliet led Alice toward the house to get her settled, Fletcher rode up from the south pasture. He took in the scene with a glance, and Juliet saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Another lost soul finding her way?" he asked quietly as Alice went inside with Sarah chattering beside her. "Another woman being underestimated," Juliet corrected. "I remember what that feels like. If we can give her a chance to prove herself, the way you gave me a chance, maybe she will find her strength too." Fletcher dismounted and pulled Juliet into his arms, not caring about the dirt from the garden or the dust from his ride. "Have I told you today that you are remarkable?" "Not today," Juliet said, her eyes dancing. "You are overdue." "You are remarkable," Fletcher said seriously. "You take in strays, both human and animal. You see potential where others see weakness. You build people up instead of tearing them down. Our children are learning that from you. James is patient with the younger horses because you taught him that gentleness is strength. Sarah understands that growing things requires both persistence and flexibility. They will carry those lessons forward. They will carry your lessons too," Juliet pointed out. "Your integrity, your loyalty, your commitment to doing things right even when shortcuts would be easier. We are both teaching them together." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner with Alice shyly joining them, Juliet looked around the table and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Thomas, recovered from his illness and laughing at something James had said. Sarah, already chattering to Alice about the garden. Fletcher, his eyes meeting hers across the table with a look of pure contentment. And the newest member of their extended family, Alice, slowly relaxing as she realized she was welcome here. This was what they had built. Not just a ranch, not just a business, but a home where people could grow into their best selves. Where strength was recognized in all its forms. Where a woman who had been called too fragile had proven that fragility was a matter of perception, not reality. As summer turned to autumn and autumn gave way to winter, Alice proved herself as capable as Juliet had suspected. She learned quickly, asking questions and applying the answers with intelligence. She reminded Juliet so much of herself at that age that it sometimes felt like looking in a mirror that reflected the past. One evening, Juliet found Fletcher on the porch, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. She wrapped a blanket around both of them and nestled against his side. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How lucky I am," Fletcher replied simply. "I could have easily missed all of this. If I had moved on to another ranch before Thomas hired me, if I had not stayed long enough to meet you, if I had let my prejudices about city women blind me to who you really were, I could have lost everything that matters. But you did not," Juliet said. "You stayed. You looked deeper. You gave us both a chance. You did the real work. You transformed yourself without losing yourself, if that makes sense. You adapted to this life while holding on to everything that made you uniquely you. That takes courage I am not sure I could have managed." Juliet was quiet for a moment, thinking about the woman she had been and the woman she had become. "I think we all have more courage than we realize, until circumstances demand we find it. I was not brave when I came here. I was desperate and lost, trying to help my brother and give my own life meaning. But this place, this life, and you, Most of all, you helped me discover courage I did not know I possessed." "That is what love does," Fletcher said. "Real love, the kind that lasts. It does not try to change the other person into something they are not. It helps them become the fullest version of themselves." "When did you become such a philosopher?" Juliet teased gently. "When I married a woman who makes me think about things I never considered before." Fletcher tightened his arm around her. "You have changed me too, Juliet. Made me better. More patient, more thoughtful, more understanding. You showed me that strength does not mean being hard all the time. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is be gentle." The snow continued to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the world in white. Inside the warm house, they could hear Thomas reading to the children, his voice rising and falling with the drama of whatever story he had chosen. Alice was in the kitchen, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. "We have built a good life," Juliet said softly, "better than I ever imagined possible." "We have," Fletcher agreed, "and we are not done yet. There are still years ahead of us, more children to raise, more challenges to face, more memories to make." He was right, of course. The years continued to roll forward, bringing both joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, all the complicated beauty of a life fully lived. In 1898, James announced his intention to marry Lucy Brennan, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Fletcher and Juliet hosted the wedding on the ranch, and it was a grand affair that brought together families from across the territory. Watching their son speak his vows, Fletcher reached for Juliet's hand, remembering their own wedding 16 years earlier. They had kept their promises to each other through every challenge and change. Sarah grew into a young woman of remarkable capability, managing both the garden operations and the ranch accounts with equal skill. She showed no interest in marrying, content with her life and work, and Fletcher and Juliet supported her choice. Their daughter would make her own path, in her own time. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1900, at the age of 50. His death hit the family hard, but they took comfort in knowing he had lived to see the ranch thrive and his sister happy. They buried him on the property he had loved, under a cottonwood tree beside the river. Alice eventually married a local carpenter and started her own family, but she remained close to the Harper Kanes, often bringing her children to visit. She never forgot that Juliet had given her a chance when she needed it most, and she tried to pay that kindness forward in her own life. By 1902, Fletcher and Juliet were grandparents. James and Lucy's son, another Fletcher, became the light of their lives. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to a schoolteacher from Reno, a gentle man who shared her love of books and learning. The Harper Kane Ranch entered its third decade stronger than ever, a testament to vision, hard work, and the power of partnership. One evening in late spring, as they had done thousands of times before, Fletcher and Juliet sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were older now, their faces lined with years of sun and wind, their hands marked by decades of labor. But they still fit together perfectly, still found comfort in each other's presence, still saw in each other the people they had first fallen in love with all those years ago. "You remember what you told me once?" Fletcher asked. "About gardens and love." "I've told you many things about gardens," Juliet said with a smile. "You will have to be more specific. You said love is like a garden. You plant seeds, tend them carefully, protect them from harsh weather, and if you are patient and consistent, you get to harvest the rewards." "I remember." Fletcher gestured at the ranch spread before them, golden in the evening light. "Look at what we harvested. This life, this family, this legacy. We planted something good and tended it with everything we had, and it grew beyond anything I could have imagined." Juliet leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his and their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. We did it together. Every seed planted, every storm weathered, every harvest celebrated. Neither of us could have done it alone. I would not have wanted to, Fletcher said. The life we built is only meaningful because I got to build it with you. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, and the first stars began to appear. From inside the house came the sound of laughter, their grandchildren visiting and filling the rooms with life and energy. Sarah called out that dinner was ready, and they could smell the savory aroma of roasted meat and fresh bread. But Fletcher and Juliet took a moment longer, savoring the peace of twilight and the satisfaction of a life well lived. They had proven wrong everyone who thought Juliet too fragile for ranch life. They had demonstrated that strength comes in many forms and that the strongest foundations are built on mutual respect, understanding, and love. "Ready to go in?" Fletcher asked eventually. "Ready," Juliet replied, but neither moved immediately. Some moments were too precious to rush. When they finally stood and walked inside together, their arms around each other, it was not an ending but a continuation. The story that had begun with a fragile-looking woman stepping off a stagecoach and a skeptical cowboy who learned to see beyond appearances had grown into something beautiful and enduring. The Harper Kane Ranch would continue for generations, each one building on the foundation Fletcher and Juliet had laid. But more than land or cattle or buildings, what they truly passed down was the knowledge that real strength is not about conforming to others' expectations. It is about finding your own capabilities, nurturing them carefully, and having the courage to bloom where you are planted. Years later, when Fletcher was 70 and Juliet 68, they still took their evening walks when weather permitted, still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still found new things to discuss after decades of conversation. Their hair was white, their steps slower, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "You have any regrets?" Juliet asked one evening. Fletcher considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked something important. "I regret the years before I met you when I was wandering without purpose. But I cannot truly regret them because that wandering led me here to you. So no real regrets. I regret the time I wasted thinking I was not strong enough," Juliet said. "But then I realized that struggle made me who I am. We are shaped by our challenges as much as our triumphs. You are a wise woman, Juliet Kane." "I am a woman who has lived and learned," Juliet corrected, "and loved. Most importantly, loved." As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Fletcher and Juliet remained on their porch, two people who had found each other across the distance of different worlds and built a bridge strong enough to last a lifetime. They had proven that love could thrive in harsh country, that partnership could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the most fragile-seeming seeds grow into the strongest trees. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, managed by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But the real legacy Fletcher and Juliet left was not measured in acres or cattle or buildings. It was measured in the lessons they taught through their lives together. That strength comes in many forms. That real courage is not the absence of fear but acting despite it. That love, when tended carefully and protected from harsh winds, grows deeper and stronger with each passing season. And that a woman called too fragile for ranch life could prove to be the strongest person anyone had ever known.